Okay, guys, it's 12 o'clock. As usual, we start off with a smaller group, and I'm assuming we're gonna build, but anyway, it's 12 o'clock and we got a lot to cover, and I need to stop right at 1:30 today. So we're gonna roll on in. So I'm just starting off with this survey thing. Honestly, I don't think, well, that's not true. I think a few of you guys have surveyed the class, so if you have a chance, matter of fact, let me just take this. I'm gonna copy this link. I'll put it in chat and make it easier for you guys. Let's copy the link. Let's pull up the chat. Okay, so the link is now in the chat to the survey. Do me a favor at some point after this class, or if you want to go back and just survey the prior classes, I would appreciate it. We're generally getting high marks, but I'm always looking to improve. So we're going to go ahead and get going. By my recollection, we left off, I believe this is near the top of page 6 or the top of page 7. And so this is where I'm starting. I'll pause for 3 seconds if someone wants to tell me I'm in the wrong spot, but I'm pretty sure that's where we're at. Okay, I tell you what, while we're maybe waiting for a few more minutes to join us or a few more people to join us, I'm at the CAR meetings, and I was in a meeting yesterday and spent 2 hours listening to the MLS committee talk about the new buyer's representation documents, which we have covered in this class, and we actually covered it, at least the box, I think on page 1 or 2, that says, hey, check this box if you're using the buyer's representation form. I'll just tell you this, there is a huge amount of confusion and misuse of this form. So we will be covering all of the buyer's representation forms. We're going to hopefully get through the contract today. If not, we'll get mostly through it today. We'll finish it up next week, and we'll go into disclosures. But I think before we get deep into disclosures, we'll take a little bit more time and go through all of these buyers, brokers forms and representation forms, because there just appears to be just a massive amount of confusion. And there's even a massive amount of confusion within the leadership at the CAR meetings, which was a little disturbing. So at any rate, so we're going to jump in here. So we're on paragraph H. Again, I think I'm at, let me just double check so I don't completely throw you guys for a break. Yeah, we are at the top of page 6. So last week we did this paragraph and then we stopped. And now we are on the following paragraph H. So removal or waiver of contingencies with the offer. The buyer shall have no obligation to remove a contractual contingency unless the seller has provided all the required documents. So let's just do a full stop there. So, buyer, it's laying it out right here. I'm not going to remove a contingency if you haven't given me everything I need in order to remove that contingency. For example, I've done my physical inspection, I've done my walkthrough, I'm the buyer. And maybe I'm approaching my day 17, but the seller has yet to give a transfer disclosure statement or an SPQ or prelim or whatever it happens to be. So if you're on the listing side, make sure all of those contractual seller documents, reports, if they've agreed to give a termite report, then the buyer's not going to remove any, physical or inspection contingencies until they get a copy of the termite report, even if they've already done their home inspection, have done it. What's the problem? Well, because the termite guy might find something different, or maybe the seller was supposed to turn over a roof report, whatever it happens to be. So basically anything that could be pertaining to that contingency, I would probably, if I'm the buyer's agent, I take the blanket statement that everything could apply to that contingency. Again, if the buyer does remove a contingency without first receiving the required information, buyer is relinquishing any contractual rights that apply to that contingency. That's why you got to be careful. Now, I would suggest that if the buyer's removed a contingency and the seller now gives them new information, it's kind of a game changer. So if the seller ultimately discloses something that was not discoverable, and now they're disclosing it after the fact, well, we're going to have some discussions about that. So bottom line is, be careful when you're removing the contingencies. Quite honestly, if you're the listing agent, I suggest you be more aggressive in requesting buyers to remove contingencies. That's generally what I see happen in most transactions. The buyer's agents aren't voluntarily removing them, they're forgetting about them, they're ignoring them. And frankly, the listing agents are pretty much falling under the same category. So keep those on your list of things to monitor. And if you're the listing agent, request them. If you're the buyer's agent, quite honestly, there can be an argument made if you're the buyer's agent to, frankly, intentionally be lazy when it comes to removing contingencies. I know a lot of agents have that philosophy. And in effect, if they're not going to ask me to remove them, I'm not going to remove them. I feel like I'm protecting my buyer. I get it, but this is the deal. If these are contingencies that you would otherwise be removing anyway, and the buyer's moving forward, remove the damn contingencies. Drop in the CAR or the CR, the contingency removal form, and remove them again as you go. You don't have to remove everything. You can remove them incrementally. So again, as always, guys, if I don't see anybody unmuted or if I don't see anything in chat, I'm just going to keep on rolling because we still have a lot of ground to cover. Removal of contingencies or cancellation for any contingency specified in the paragraphs above or previous pages here or elsewhere. The buyer shall within the applicable period of time remove the contingency cancel agreements. That's what we were just talking about. So there's a paragraph in here near the end. It's the time is of the essence clause. And it in effect is telling everybody there are dates and times within the contract. It's important, follow the contract. And that's in effect what this paragraph is saying. So if it says you have 14 days to remove it, do it. 17 days, do it. If the timeframes have changed, stick with those dates. For contingencies for review of seller's documents, we just talked about that. Prelims, whatever it happens to be. Again, get those to the buyer in a timely fashion. It's basically going to apply with whatever you guys have in paragraph 3L, or generally speaking, the 5-day rule is what's going to apply. So I got the prelim on day whatever, and I now have 5 days after delivery of that document to take a look at it. We've talked previously in these classes about all the condominium documentation. I need copies of minutes and CC&Rs and bylaws and special assessments and just all that sort of stuff. If you're going to have a problem as a listing agent or a buyer, it's probably going to have to do with that. If you don't order those quickly, they take time. Association management companies, frankly, tend to be slow and not very deliberate in getting those. So keep a close eye on there. Item 3, if the buyer does not remove the contingency within the time specified, it's what we were just talking about. You've got to either intentionally lazy agent, intentionally, I'm not going to do it unless they ask for it, or they've forgotten. First, the seller after giving the buyer a notice to perform, that's the form NBP, notice to buyer to perform, then she'll have the right to cancel agreement. So a seller cannot cancel for a buyer's failure to remove a contingency unless they have first given the buyer the notice of buyer to perform. So follow the instructions. The buyer, of course, needs to respond to that, either remove the contingency or not. If they haven't removed the contingency at that point, then the seller will have the right to cancel agreement. Sale of the buyer's property. If you have a transaction that is contingent upon the buyer selling their property, then you're going to fill out the form COP. And it then becomes part of the transaction. However, it does say the agreement and buyer's ability to obtain financing are not contingent upon the sale unless it's contingent upon that. Generally, that means the buyer can't buy this house because they're not going to have the down payment to buy the house unless they get that proceeds from the sale of their house, or they can't afford 2 separate mortgage payments. So that's what they're referring to here. Okay, I don't see anybody unmuted. We're going to keep on rolling. Items included and excluded from the sale. Note to buyer and seller, items listed and included or excluded in multiple listing service, flyers, marketing materials, or disclosures are not included in the purchase price. So, and also to that vein, if it says something in the MLS that says, hey, the pool equipment doesn't stay, okay, that's a good idea. Put that in the MLS, but you need to get that in the contract. Don't refer back to whatever it says in the MLS. So whatever items you've included or excluded, get it in the contract, whatever that particular item is. I believe we discussed best practice previously. If I'm the listing agent and the seller tells me, hey, I want to take grandma's chandelier or grandma's ceiling fan, just get the damn thing out of there, before you even put the thing on the market. If you can't practically get it out that quick, get it out as quickly as possible. Attempting to avoid, I have a buyer, they've written an offer, they've seen grandma's ceiling fan, their expectation is grandma's ceiling fan is, and now you got a negotiation point that you otherwise wouldn't have had. If you remove it in advance, put a new one in there, put a cap on there, whatever it happens to be, you don't have that deal. But get them out, and that applies to anything. So have that conversation with the seller. Again, best practice is to get the damn things out of the property before any buyer even has a chance to see them. Keep it in mind, all fixtures and fittings attached to the property are included. So this is one of those real estate exam questions. So for those of you new licensees, and I don't know, there used to be a question about fixtures in the contract. The basic definition of a fixture is it's screwed down. So anything that is screwed down is a fixture. So let's take a refrigerator. If it's just a freestanding refrigerator that's kind of pushed in there, like so many of the ones in the houses we sell, that is not a fixture. That is personal property. By the way, being plugged into the wall does not make it a fixture. It has to be kind of built in and designed to be permanent. So for example, a Sub-Zero refrigerator, the nice, expensive, high-end refrigerators, those are built in. Okay, those are considered fixtures. So anything that's screwed in, mini blinds, valances, ceiling fans, whatever it happens to be is considered a fixture. So just be very, very careful with that. Garage door openers, controls, mailboxes, landscaping stuff, water features, all that sort of stuff is included. So the fountain that's wired in with the thing, it's a fixture. What about the potted plant? Is the potted plant bolted down? No, it's not a fixture. It's personal property. So now if you have one of these beautifully landscaped properties that has tons and tons of potted plants, and they're big and they're giant, the plants are huge, and they kind of make the property, you as the listing agent, or the buyer's agent for that matter, better document, are those things included or excluded? Because if you close escrow and the buyer shows up and they're all gone, well, they weren't screwed down. Well, come on, Lance, they made the entire property. Well, yeah, they did, and you didn't ask for them. They're not fixtures. So make sure you identify those things and take care. And just a simple walkthrough. I've got a dozen stories on these sort of things. People taking valances in the master bedroom that were, they're custom valance for a custom window, but they matched the seller's bedspread, so they wanted to take them with them. Just stupid stuff like that. Like even the tenant, when we just moved, this is commercial, so it doesn't matter, but we just moved into that commercial building in Covina, and the tenant had mini blinds apparently that the tenant had installed that before we were going in. And the tenant, they're like, hey, these are my mini blinds, and if you want them, you got to pay me for them. I kind of sort of got it. She spent some money on them. They're nothing. We ended up throwing most of them in the trash anyway. But the irony of it was, what are you going to do with these mini blinds? These are just 1 inch or 2 inch slats. No big deal. They're custom fit for this window. Do you have a window that these are going to fit in? Doesn't matter whether they have a window that they're going to fit in. If they're going to take them, they're going to take them. Now, in that case, those were fixtures. Okay. I chose not to fight it because I didn't want to fight it. But even though it's just a cheapo little mini blind, if it's screwed into the window frame, it is a fixture. So just be very careful to make sure you're identifying what's included and what's excluded. If you use the nailed down, screwed down rule, generally you're going to be okay. Not always. I'm sure if someone gives me an example, we can make an argument as to whether that could be considered a fixture or not. And frankly, if you're making that argument and you think that argument's going to be made before you accept a contract, have that dialogue with the other agent to make sure you're cool. Security systems, devices, we've run into this for years. You got the ADT security panel. It's been beat up. It's all dirty. It's grimy. Well, again, it's screwed down. It's hardwired. It's a fixture. These things are becoming more and more common. I've got these new Arlo cameras, these wireless cameras like Ring video doorbells and stuff like that. I'm spending a lot of money on these things. Well, they're fixtures. Part of me could say, hey, I'm going to sell this property. I want to take it with me. Well, it's a security system. It's included in those little module things are either, well, Lance, they're not screwed down, but they're used double stick adhesive. I get it, but it's part of a larger security system, so they stay. So just be careful with that, especially if you got a little fancier house with a whole bunch of smart devices and Alexa this and Alexa that, built-in speakers. If you've got speakers that are built in where wires are pulled through the attic and they're screwed up to the ceiling, they stay. I see those things taken out all the time though. Leased or liened, I think we kind of touched base on this in one of the prior paragraphs. So again, we use our solar panels as an example. Be careful, however, not to just use the solar panels as your one and only example, because if you do that, it's not just solar panels that we're referring to. So make sure you understand, and there is a huge difference between leased or liened. The argument I'm going to make is if it's liened, the homeowner owns it. Okay. Well, wait a minute, Lance, but what do you mean they own it? It sounds like there's a lien. There's a lien on the property, but normally these liens are part of a property tax issue. And this is the deal. If you don't pay your property taxes on these hero ones, for example, nobody's going to foreclose on that property tax and come back in and take the solar panels. What they could do is foreclose on the property tax and take the entire property. Okay. But there is a difference between the leased items and the lien. So leased, think of it, hey, I've got a piece of paper, just like I leased my car, and it says I make X amount of monthly payments on this. I make it to the ABC Solar Company. If I don't honor that, they can come out and take those off the property. Generally speaking, they don't want to do that, though. They don't want to take them off the property. They want to sue you, and they want to sue you for damages. But bottom line, talk to your seller. I told a story last week or the week before. I was out with Iran in front of a seller. Within 3 minutes, we went from, you have solar panels. Do you own them, or do you make payments? Are they leased? No, we don't make any payments. We own them. We went to a totally different topic. We accidentally came back to the solar panel, and the seller told me the exact opposite of what he told me before. And basically said, oh, and I don't think we made a payment on those in a while. So take a few extra minutes. And again, don't just think if I don't see solar panels, I don't have anything to worry about. You know, there's a gazillion things out there that fall into this category. So again, just make sure you identify. And on the seller, on the buyer side is too, you need to take some time. Probe the listing agent, ask some questions, look around, see if anything jumps out at you. Okay, we are now on the top of page.
I have a question, Lance.
Oh, go ahead.
On regarding leased or lien,
Yep.
if you're the seller, what do you actually have to produce to show either one? Do you just like, I mean, a bill or on the
Yeah.
leased or the purchase of the, if you purchased it?
Yeah, well, it's going to be documentation, and if it's leased, you're going to have documentation paperwork that says here is the lease, this is the terms of that lease, this is how many years are left on the lease, these are the options to pay it off early, or you know what happens when you get to the end. At the end of the lease, do I own this? Again, we'll use the solar panels. Do I own them? Do I return them? Do I get to buy them for $1, which is generally the case on these things? So there's going to be a document, and that document needs to be produced and sent over to the buyer for review, ultimately sent over to escrow, because what you want to do when you sell the property is you want the buyer to assume that lease. They want to take it over, right? So they're now going to be picking up the $300 a month payment or whatever it happens to be. So yes, there's documentation there on the liened items. And we'll review this when we review. It's funny, you know, we're going through contract college, and I don't think we actually review a copy of a preliminary title report in the contract college course. So what I will do, because there is a solar panel leased liened disclosure form, I will pull in a page or two from a preliminary title report, and we'll show you where those liens are. And there'll be a very clear lien, depending upon what it is. It'll say it's lien, blah, 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 blah. Normally these will show up on property tax bills, and then there's some documentation behind what that lien is, which also would include an early payoff, you know, any sort of prepayment penalty. Most of them don't have prepayment penalties, but if you guys, again, I've talked about this before, this is one of the blessings and the curse of doing contract college. I love telling these stories. The only challenge is the more stories I tell, the longer it takes us to get through contract college. But when you end up liening these properties, let's, for example, say if you purchased the solar panels and you had them installed by, you know, Solar City, and you paid cash in advance, let's just say they're going to be 10 grand. Okay. If you end up leasing these things, there's costs associated with that. Your $10,000 cost now soars to, I don't know, let's say $18,000. If you let them lien them, like on the Hero program, to be honest with you, it's insane. And these companies have gotten a lot of trouble. So they would charge you, for example, $20,000 for something that you could get on the open market for $10,000. And then on top of that premium that you pay, because you pay nothing up front, the interest and the carrying costs on it are ridiculous. So I've seen some of these, I haven't looked at them recently, but ones I looked at previously when we were all hot and heavy about the Hero program, you know, be $35,000, $40,000 would be the ultimate cost of this liened item. And you kind of look at what they did. You say, you got to be kidding me. I could have done that exact same thing for 14 grand. And these people are paying $40,000. So be careful with it. But short answer, Irene, is yeah, there's documentation. And frankly, if that documentation is difficult to find or unavailable, you're going to have a problem. You're going to need to find it. If it's liened, it's easier because there's going to be a paper trail with the county recorder. You'll be able to find it there. If it's a lease document and the sellers lost it because they did it 7 years ago and they don't know where it is, well, hopefully there's a sticker somewhere on a piece of equipment you can call.
Yeah, and the only reason why I asked that is because I was talking with someone who's interested in selling, and they said they have solar, and
Yep.
what happened is they turned around and they bought the house new. They only leased the solar, but during the past couple of years, the solar company sold it to another solar company
Yep.
for the lease. So now it's all about backtracking, and so.
Yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem. You know, this honestly, this would be a topic we could bring in Christina or Summer on the escrow side because they run into these things periodically. There's probably another agent on the training here today who's had this challenge where the documentation is lost, or the original solar company went out of business and they got taken over by another solar company. These things happen all the time. The bottom line is, Irene, they're a pain in the butt, but they generally all get solved. But these are the type of things you got to keep your radar up for, because they happen frequently. So just be prepared. If you do run into that, there are solutions. Again, we're going a little deeper in this different topic, but kind of sort of the same. I'll give you guys a different example. Occasionally, the name's escaping me. Maybe Drew will remember the name. When you've got a lien on a property and there's no trace of that lien, whether it's a panel, solar panel, or maybe Uncle Bob, you know, took out a $20,000 second trust deed and now Uncle Bob is dead and you got to get a bond. And there is a bond that has a specific name, which is escaping me. It's a surety bond of sorts. If anybody can help me out, I'd appreciate it. So while I'm waiting for someone to bail me out with the name of this thing, bottom line is you buy insurance for something like that, Irene. So if you can't find the documentation for this solar panel, or maybe this $20,000 lien that Uncle Bob has on the property that he never reconveyed, and now Uncle Bob is dead, you know, what Summer or Christina will do is they'll go to a bonding company. And the type of bond is escaping me, but they'll get a bond. And the bonding company will say, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen? And what the buyer is concerned about, and what the title company is concerned about, is you close escrow. We think Uncle Bob is dead. We think the solar panel company's out of business. And then 4 years later, Uncle Bob ain't dead. Or ABC Solar, you know, comes back and says, hey, I bought the contract from this solar company. You owe me $5,000. You owe me $10,000. You owe me $40,000. So what you do in those cases, and this is a pain in the butt, guys, just to be clear, but it's done. I don't know. I've probably done 5 or 6 of these in the last 20 years. But what happens is you buy again, I want to say a surety bond. Drew, it looks like you're searching for it.
Well, that's what I know it has as a surety bond,
It's a
right?
surety bond. Yeah, they have I think there's another name to it. But anyway, bottom line is you buy a bond. That bond covers the cost of whatever the title company, quite honestly, they're going to be the ones that are going to tell you. They're going to say, hey, okay, cool, we got a $25,000 problem here. We need a $25,000 bond to cover this. And normally it's not a $25,000 bond. Normally they want to double it or something like that. So anyway, the seller goes out and buys this surety bond for $50,000, costs them several $1,000s. That covers the title company, that covers the new owner, just in case this lost documentation ultimately ends up getting found. And then 2 years later, 5 years later, somebody starts knocking on the buyer's door saying you owe me money. So you guys do this business long enough, you will run into these problems. Your initial response when you get this phone call from escrow will be a panic attack. Relax, take a deep breath. It's won't be easy, but it will get done. So, but Irene, get the paperwork. Getting the paperwork is always the easiest, whether it's leased or liened. And I would suggest initially, most of the people I seem to have any experience on this, they don't seem to be readily able to find this paperwork. It just seems like it got stuffed away and they're not very good record keepers. Okay, so let's keep on rocking and rolling. So we're still in the same category. We're still, just to go back, we're still in the leased and liened items section. So we're just going over to the next page. Seller represents that all items included in the purchase price, unless otherwise agreed, are owned by the seller and shall be transferred free and clear. Okay, so we own it. These are mine. So unless I've told you otherwise, this is mine. I own everything and I'm transferring everything with the sale of the property. Items included, or excuse me, items excluded from the sale, again, unless otherwise agreed in writings, everything is included. Okay, it's included. Okay, I like this one. I think they changed this in the last couple of years. Unless otherwise agreed, the following items are excluded. I'm sorry, excluded. All items specific and pairs, so the stuff that we specifically outlined, audio video components such as flat screen TVs, speakers, and other items, if such item is not itself attached to the property. Okay, even if a bracket or other mechanism attached to the component or the item is attached to the property. Brackets and attached to walls and floors for such component fixtures and items will be removed and holes will be painted. So this used to be a bigger deal. Everybody wanted to take their flat screen TV. I spent $5,000. I'm taking my flat screen TV, and that damn TV mount cost me, $300. I'm taking them with me. Quite honestly, I think that's changed. Flat screen TVs aren't as expensive anymore. The mounts aren't as expensive anymore. It's been there for 3 years. People can go out and buy a newer, better, cleaner one for a reasonable price. But keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on that. Okay, allocation of costs, inspection reports, tests, and certificates. So we're going back to paragraph 3Q 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Who's paying for what? Okay, so this just references the inspections, who is paying for what, and we've already determined that previously. Okay, government required or corrective remedial actions, legally required installation of property improvements. So these are the mandated things: the smoke detectors, the carbon monoxide, water heater strapping. That's the type of stuff that they're specifically referring to. Now, I know we've got these new laws about water fixtures and all the rest of that. Those can be basically assumed by the buyer for their responsibility. The main thing we're talking about is smoke detectors, water heater straps, carbon monoxides. These things have to be in place prior to close of escrow. And now where you run into another one is there are a whole bunch of cities out there that have point of sale inspections. So it's a little bit different than what this paragraph refers to, but it's pretty much the same thing. Because if you have a point of sale inspection and the city requires an inspection and remedial actions prior to close of escrow, which most of them will, well, that is a government requirement. So city of Compton comes out, or Linwood, or there's a couple of cities that are closer to us than those, but those are the ones that I know because I've sold properties there when I was a very young agent, and they had point of sale inspections 30 years ago. They give you the thing, you do it. There's no negotiation. Hey, you don't have a permit for that, you're pulling a permit for that. It's the city, it's government, they're going to do it. So that has to be done. And you guys will be running into those things other than the smoke detector, water heater, straps, and carbon monoxide. Drew and I had one I think it was on a foreclosure. It might have been one of the hedge funds. I don't remember. There was a house, I think it was on Bay Avenue in Moreno Valley. It was a nice house and a really nice like room addition that was off to the side. And I don't remember exactly what prompted it, but we kind of looked at it. This is nice. I think it was nice. But we kind of looked at it and said, I know what prompted it is I had sold other properties in that neighborhood. And even if you hadn't, it was clear as day that this was a room addition. And anyway, we kind of somehow we did some due diligence, discovered that there had been I believe there was a permit that was pulled on this property, but the permit was never actually finalized. So there was this outstanding unfinished permit. And I don't know if there was a lien or notice to abate. I don't know what it was, but all I know is the seller or buyer, whoever we represented at the time, we looked at it. And we were concerned that the cost to finalize the work was gonna exceed our tolerance for pain. And I think we represented the seller. I don't know. All I know is that this damn beautiful room addition got torn down. We tore down this room addition and anyway, that was in part because of a government requirement. In that case, the government requirement was a little bit different. We just had an unresolved permit that we needed to get resolved. And all way to get that resolved and to get that off of the city of Moreno Valley's code compliance was to correct it. In that case, it meant removal. Okay, point of sale requirements. So we just talked about that. Some of these cities have point of sale requirements. You have to have them come out. They do their inspection. They do their whole 9 yards. Know where you are. Okay. So if you're in it, again, one of the very, I think it was the first or second properties I ever sold was in the city of Linwood. I didn't know anything, to be honest with you, but what I learned very quickly is the city of Linwood has a point of sale requirement and inspection. I learned. It was like, I think it was my second transaction. So from almost the very beginning of my real estate career, I was, some cities have this. So if you guys have only sold properties in Moreno Valley and they don't have a point of sale, well, next time you go across the street into a different jurisdiction, make sure you know what you're getting into. Reinspection fees, if there's repairs associated with these things, who's going to be responsible to pay for that? The reality is, I think it really kind of depends on why there's a reinspection. Is an appraiser, for example, going out to reinspect because there wasn't a smoke detector? Who pays for that? Well, I would think the seller is probably going to pay for that. So that's what they're referring to and stuff like that. Information and advice on requirements. Okay, again, we're not attorneys. We're not experts. We don't know one city's jurisdictional requirements from the other. So in effect, this is telling that agents do not have expertise in this area and cannot ascertain all of the requirements or costs. So be careful. This was one of Norm's things that he would always refer to, and I would always agree with. Because again, as a younger agent, I thought I was a hot shot and I would go down to the city. I would pull a permit. I would take a look at those sort of things, thinking I was helping my client. And generally speaking, I think I was helping my client. I thought I was doing a good job. But if you miss something at the desk when you're talking to code compliance or when you're talking to building and safety, or you misinterpret something, or the person behind the desk gives you the wrong information, and now you relay that, you got a problem. Okay. So again, when we're running into these things, as much as we want to help our clients, you need to make sure you're referring these clients, they directly need to go. Or if you're giving them documentation and you're sending them some stuff that you found at the city of Riverside, for example, is a really cool online deal. You could go online, you can type in an address, you can see a ton of information. So I would not interpret that information. If I did that for a client, I would send them the link. I would say, here's the link from the city's portal. This is what you can take a look at. You can verify it. And oh, by the way, here's the address for building and safety and code compliance. Go take a peek at it. Home warranties. Again, we're always recommending home warranty plans on all of the transactions. I don't care if the house was built yesterday. I don't care if the house comes with a standard 10-year builder warranty. Let the buyer decide that they don't want to get a home warranty. We should never be saying, oh, you don't need a home warranty, it's brand new. Now, do they need a home warranty because it's brand new? Probably not. I mean, if the building is a respectable builder, if it's KB or Lennar or something like that, I'm personally am not getting a home warranty. I have a home warranty in the form of a builder warranty, but I'm never going to let those words pass my lips where I have told the buyer they don't need it. Okay. So even if the house is 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, it looks great. What could go wrong? Everything's fine. Let the buyer make that decision. Again, if the buyer waives that, then they're going to check the box accordingly and they're going to waive. Also, warrant, I think I mentioned this before previously. They use the word warrant. This has always just been a pet peeve of mine. They use the word warranty and protection plan kind of, interchangeable in these. I generally try not to use the word home warranty, even though it says it plain and clear. I generally use the word home protection plan. And I think if we read through this document here or previously, we're going to, even within the contract, they'll some areas call it a home warranty plan, and then in other areas will call it a home protection plan. So that's just that's kind of a me thing. Warranty tends to imply everything's going to be covered. Okay, statutory and other disclosures, including lead-based paint, hazards, et cetera, et cetera. Again, statutory, those are required by law, statute, required by statute. So there is a civil code somewhere that says, and you'll see these all over. So we've got 1102 and 1103, and there's a Bond Improvement Act 1955, and we got 1102.6. Because so these are all statutory civil codes that are going to require these certain disclosures. So pretty straightforward. So these are required. They have to be delivered. They have to be accepted. If they're not accepted, then there are going to be certain cancellation rights, as our title suggests, that the buyer may be able to exercise. So again, we've got the normal ones. We've got the transfer disclosure. We've got the natural hazard. We've got the lead-based paint. So I'm not going to go through and read these. I think we all kind of generally understand that these are required. We do, and the reason I'm not going to go through and read these is because every single one of these forms we will go through in the balance of contract college. So we'll go through these in detail, the transfer disclosure statement, the NHD, all the rest of that. So, but again, needless to say, these must be provided. They need to be provided within the time frame specified, going back to page 1 or 2 on paragraph 3N. Generally, on most of these, it's within 7 days from the time of acceptance. Get them over to the client. The client's cancellation and review rights start quickly. This is just a continuation again of those rights, more reference to the TDS. We have a reference to the SPQ. So I'm not going to go through that too much here. We'll cover it quite a bit in detail when we get to the disclosure section a couple days or a couple weeks from now in contract college. Lead disclosures, again, required statutory disclosure. We're going to use the lead disclosure for the properties that it applies to. Which having said that, guys, if you're not sure, just use the darn form. If you've got a property that was built 5 years ago, you represent the buyer and the listing agent has a lead disclosure form in there, just fill the thing out. Don't argue with them about, oh, this doesn't apply. You know, this house was built, you know, in 2015 and we're talking about properties that were built in 1978. Just sign the damn form. It's not hurting anything. But again, we will go through the lead-based paint form in detail when we do the disclosures. Same thing with home fire hardening disclosure. We will go through that form in detail. Again, it is statutory. Now, again, it's not required on every single property. On the NHD, if the property, somebody help me out on this, and when we get there, we'll identify if the property is in a, I think it's a high severity zone or in a fire zone. If it's in one of those zones, okay, I apologize, I don't remember exactly which one it is, then the home fire hardening disclosure is required. If it's not in one of those zones, then you don't need it. Okay, so when we get to that form, I'll give you a little bit more clarity on what that is because it's escaping me right now. Now, I will tell you, when this first came out a couple of years ago, again, I one thing I love about doing it, at first I hated it, now I love it. It just makes me think of Norm. I would talk to Norm about this, and we're like, oh man, this is going to be a real pain in the rear end. You know, or how quickly are we going to be able to get these? And is the county fire going to be cooperative and city fire? I will tell you, I've had zero problems in getting these. I've only had to get a few of them myself, or on properties that Drew has handled for us. But on the ones that I've somewhat been involved in with you guys have called, we've talked about it, you know, 48 hours later, you call me back and you say, yeah, I got what I needed, and everybody's happy. So it doesn't seem to be that big of a challenge. Same thing with the defensible space disclosure. It kind of falls into the same category. This all has to do with fire safety. And he goes, so here, we just answered our question. For a transaction in which the TDS is required and the property is located in a high or very high fire severity zone. So those are the ones that we're looking at. I guess if I would have read up here, I could have seen the same language. I didn't actually read it. I just looked at the bullet point. So if on the NHD, those boxes are checked, and you'll know it, because not only are you going to have to deal with this, buyer's going to pay more fire insurance costs, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we'll go into these in detail. You cannot waive the statutory disclosures. So again, whether it's lead or whether it's the smoke detector or water heater disclosures, you cannot waive it. I don't know if Chris is truly on the call or whether that's Misty, but I see Chris logged in. So Chris does some flips. Maybe Chris buys a property and he just knows, I'm gonna gut this thing. You know, I don't care if it has smoke detectors in it. I don't care if the water heater's strapped. I don't care. Because he knows he's gonna go in 2 days later and tear it all out. In the back of his mind, he might say, I don't care. Contractually, the state of California doesn't care if you don't care. The smoke detectors go in, the water heater gets strapped, carbon monoxides go in. If you close escrow and you tear them out the next day, that's fine. So just be aware that these cannot be waived. And if you're going to look the other way, you're not going to put that in writing. Okay. You're just going to, okay, I don't want it. I don't care. Fine. But you're not going to put it in writing. Seller agrees not to install smoke detectors. That's going to be a problem. I kind of figured that was you, Misty. So no need to apologize. I'd rather have you here than Chris anyway. So, okay, keep it moving on here. Return of signed copies. Buyer shall within a specified time. We've already talked about on the prior page, or within 5 days after delivery. Basically, return the signed copies back to the buyer, back to the seller, and in effect approved them. So the buyer has received the transfer disclosure, they've received whatever they've received, they've had them in their hands for 5 days, they execute them and they return them. If they don't return them, notice to buyer to perform, possibly cancellation. So buyer needs to get that back within their period of time. Termination rights. So again, statutory disclosures. Any disclosure that we've talked about that is delivered to the buyer and has been signed, the buyer has the right to terminate the agreement. Okay, so 3 days if it's delivered in person, 5 days if it's delivered in electronic mail, or whatever it happens to be. Generally, we're not delivering stuff in person very often. They look at it. I'm canceling. Why am I canceling? I'm canceling because it's in a fire zone. I'm canceling because you said there's something on the TDS. The neighbor makes noise, whatever it happens to be. Okay, so they have their ability to cancel for all of the statutory issues. Defensible space, if in the time specified, same exact thing. Buyer does not agree to the terms regarding the defensible space. So buyer didn't realize, hey, I'm on a hillside and now I'm supposed to defend whatever it is, 100 feet of vegetation from fire. I don't want to do that. I'm not interested in doing that. I didn't realize. I thought the golf course maintained that, or I thought the city came out and cut these weeds down. I don't want to do it. Okay, so in theory, you've got a buyer who can terminate based upon those items. I don't see anybody muted. I'm going to keep on going. Withholding taxes. Okay, so this is one of those where you kind of got to, tell your client, hey, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a CPA, I'm not a tax professional, et cetera, et cetera. This is an opportunity for you to talk about the good old form AS, the good old form QS, okay, and that you're going to be asking the clients for these. So if you struggle with, Lance, I still don't understand the AS and the affidavit of foreign status, and I still don't understand the QS. I don't know if this paragraph does a great job explaining it, but in effect, what it's telling the clients, in this case, the seller, is there are withholding requirements. There are tax withholding requirements from the states and from the feds. And in order to comply with those, you have to do certain things. What do I have to do? I have to fill out a form AS. Okay. If I don't provide my social security number and my tax information, I have to then have escrow assist with a QS. Very, very clear. Okay. So take a minute, guys, understand this language. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into it here because part of contract college, we go extensively through the AS and the QS, but this is the reference here. So this is the reference that goes back to both of those forms. Make sure that you understand those forms. And the simplest thing is, guys, just do the damn QS. If you're not going to do the QS, put the damn social security number on the AS and you're done. I mean, that's all there is to it. Okay. Just get her done. It's the law. We have no choice. Megan's Law. This is the registered sex offender database, which is here. If you've never, by the way, I always tell you guys never to go here. Every one of you guys need to go. Matter of fact, let's do that real quick. Let's have some fun. Let's go to Megan's Law. Now, we're not going to do anything anywhere close to a property that we may have or something that we're going to list. So that's what I don't want you to do. I don't want you to go search, an area where you have a listing, and I don't want you to go search even your own house, which by the way, you might not be able to help yourself. I used to do this all the time because there truly was a registered sex offender that lived. I could throw a rock over my fence and I could hit him in the head. But the only problem with you do that, if you're going to sell a property in your neighborhood, you could have a problem. So I haven't been here in a little while. So it looks like we can search by name. I don't think I want to do that because I don't know who I'm looking for. It can look like I can search. Yes, let's search on a map. So I'm going to do my old house in Lakewood. 51 13 Bixler. I think it's Bixler. Oops. By the way, if anybody plans on selling a house in the city of Lakewood, turn your screen off here for a minute because that's where I'm searching. Okay. I don't think I have the number correct. Oh my gosh, I don't remember the zip code over there. Anybody remember the zip code? Yeah, I don't. Crap. I think I need that. Shit. Oh, I didn't know I was going to need that. Hold on a minute. I'm too deep into it. I got to do it now. Lakewood zip code.
I'm looking for it.
Yeah, I think I got it. This looks like Lakewood. New Jersey.
90711.
I know that sounds close enough. Let's do that. 90711. Okay, so we'll do a 2-mile search. And transient offenders. I don't remember that last time. So, and let's do the map search. So this is what you're going to get. So there you go. All right. So this is the world that we live in. So this is why I brought you to this site, even though I tell you never to go to this site, is guys, I don't care what, and this is what I would tell my buyers. And this is what I would tell them. So guys, if this is a concern of yours, you probably already know this information, because if you have history with this, or there's somebody that you're concerned about, a registered sex offender whack job out there, you probably already know where they live. If you've never been concerned with this, and the first time that you're being introduced to this in kind of a formal setting is on this contract, just know this is what you're going to find. Okay. So I don't think I put my street in exactly correctly, but let's just for argument's sake, say I lived where this house did. And I live pretty damn close to this. And I'm within a 2-mile radius. I mean, look at this. It's just bananas. I don't know the difference between the red and the green. So let's click on one of these. Okay. So there we got Eric. Okay. It looks like just a great guy. Generally speaking, there's going to be some sort of lewd, lascivious act. Yep. See, obviously I've got way too much experience. Lewd or lascivious acts with a child 14 or 15 years of old. So this is the type of stuff that you're going to find on this site. So if you've never been there, there you go. Consider yourself educated. But again, once you set foot on this site, specifically any site that is near a listing, you now have a duty to disclose, oh yes, by the way, I was on the Megan's Law database, and best I can tell, there's about 35 people that live within a walking distance of your house. So just be careful unless you want to have those conversations with your client. I will tell you, just as kind of a sidebar, and we'll move on. When this site first came out, I don't know how many years ago, it's been a long time. I used to go and I'd check it out, and I'd see 1 or 2 little dots here, and I'd always be worried. I'd be worried because I'd say, oh, shoot, man, nobody's going to want to buy this house because right around the block, there's one guy. Well, I don't know. It didn't take very long. The 1 or 2 dots turned into just hundreds and hundreds of dots. These guys are everywhere. So anyway, it is what it is. So there's your Megan's Law disclosure. So we don't do what I just did. We tell them to go to the website. We tell them to check it out. And if they have concerns, they satisfy themselves accordingly. Who's unmuted? Oh, that's Drew. So I'm assuming he just walked away and left himself unmuted. Okay, so notice regarding gas and natural liquid transmission lines. So what they're referring to here is it seems like every 3 or 4 or 5 years, you guys will turn on the news and there'll be a neighborhood that's just completely blown up, and 30 houses have been leveled and a bunch of people have been killed. And you read the story, it's like, oh, a natural gas line exploded underneath this neighborhood and it wiped everybody out. This is what they're talking about. Okay. So there's all sorts of stuff that's underneath neighborhoods and through cities that we don't even realize. Well, some of it every now and then fails. So similar to the registered sex offender database, There is another database that basically identifies where all of these transmission lines are. So if you have a buyer that is worried about that sort of stuff, they can go to this website, they can punch in an address, and it will tell them exactly what sort of pipelines are running in and around or underneath their properties. So again, it's rare, but it happens. I can't remember the last time, but last time it happened, I think I did a contract college, or I did something like 3 days later, and we spent an hour talking about it. Okay, natural and environmental hazards. This is not the NHD, although it mentions the NHD. The main thing that we're referencing here is the earthquake guide in the environmental hazards booklet. One day, unless somebody tell me it's finally here, they're going to put this in zip forms with the fully executed or executable document, as opposed to we got to tear out that stupid page, or you guys have a photocopy of it somewhere. I don't know why, for the life of me, we don't make that easier for us to get that completed and executed. But am I wrong? Is it still in the book and we still have to use that stupid ass page and it's not in zip forms? Unmute yourself if someone has updated information, but last I checked, it's not a zip form. So we still need it. It's that one little page. It's got the little box on it that basically says the buyers have received the earthquake book and environmental hazards. And again, it does reference the NHD and a few other things. Okay, condominium PUD. So we're disclosing that the seller within the specified time, and there's multiple places in the contract, we talk about that, is going to disclose to the buyer the property is in an HOA. Basically, here's the CC&Rs, here's the minutes, here's the bylaws, here's the rules and regulations, here's everything. So it's part of that disclosure requirement. Order it early as you possibly can, as sometimes they need to get paid for in advance. So again, get all that. Here's a list. I didn't list everything. Copies of documents required, pending anticipated claims, statement of number of designated. I think Drew, or did we have one where we sold one where we messed up on the parking, or was that Misty? Is that one of yours? Whether we sold a somebody recently sold a condo and we didn't know where the garage was, or we got the wrong garage. I don't have this memory within the last 6 months. This happened in the office. You know, the garage was misidentified. The buyer thought the garage was right there. Turned out that wasn't their garage. The garage that they had was like one building over. Could have been a big deal. Turned out not to be that big of a deal. Apparently the seller didn't even know it. Seller didn't even know where their damn garage was accordingly. But anyway, you got to get minutes. You got to get all that sort of stuff. You know, can you smoke in the property? Can you smoke weed in the property? All of these things are important to different people. So make sure you get that information over to them. Solar systems, I think we probably whipped that to death. So anything to do with solar needs to be done. This is kind of a catch-all, known material facts. When we get into the disclosure section of Contract College, it seems like every other sentence I will be talking about known material facts. So this is just putting it into the contract that the seller must disclose, and they put it nice bold caps here, and they put it in caps over here. They must disclose known material facts. Material facts, simple. Anything that would change the buyer's willingness to buy, anything that would change the buyer's willingness to pay a certain price. So anything. We're going to put that in and we're going to get that out. Also talks about insurance claims over the last 5 years. This is one of those that kind of gets overlooked, but contractually, the seller must disclose insurance claims that have been made on the property in the last 5 years. Most sellers don't read this in the contract. They don't know, they don't remember. Agents are careless about it. I've been careless about it at times. But this could be a deal killer. Buyer gets ready to close escrow. The insurance companies do this, by the way. So the buyer orders a new insurance policy with Farmers Insurance. Before they issue that policy, they run what's called a CLUE report. Can't remember the acronym, but they run a CLUE, C-L-U-E. That report in effect says these are all the claims that have been on the property. If those claims have not been previously disclosed, then they get disclosed to the buyer from the insurance company. So, oh, by the way, I'm sorry, your rate's going to be twice as much as everything else because there's been 3 floods in this property in the last 5 years, all sorts of water damage, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure that your seller understands they need to disclose all material facts, including insurance claims. There was a question that came up, not a question, a discussion that came up yesterday, which I thought was kind of silly. Sierra was talking about creating a brand new form for anybody who is flipping a house. And the concept was this form would specifically say, I flipped this house. And by the way, I've only owned it for 3 months, 5 months, whatever, how long it took me to clean it up. And these are the repairs that I did on that property in the last 3, 4 months, 5 months. In effect, disclosing to the buyer that the house was a flip, but more importantly, I suppose, disclosing to the buyer that all these repairs have been done. And I'm like, we don't need another new form. You got to do that already. It's already in the SPQ. Have you done any work on the property? Is there any work that's been done without necessary permits, et cetera, et cetera? So all that stuff has got to be disclosed. Nevertheless, known material facts. Okay, buyer's investigation of property and matters affecting the property. This truly is kind of a buyer can kind of in effect do whatever they want. Contractually, the buyer, again, within the time frame specified, they have the right at their own expense to do any inspection they want. However, they do have to have permission of the seller. Okay, so if it's important that, hey, I want to do a roof inspection. Okay, cool. I'm the seller. I don't care. Do a roof inspection, but I'm not paying for it because the roof's fine. Oh, and by the way, whoever goes up there needs to indemnify me because if they crack my tile or whatever, somebody else needs to pay for it. Generally, you're not going to preclude a buyer from doing some sort of an inspection. Are there times when you would? Sure. It might jeopardize the deal. In other words, for example, mold, the buyer says, I want to do I want to have a mold inspector go out and I want to do that. If that's my house or that's my listing, no way. No one set foot on my property to do a quote unquote mold inspection. And it has nothing to do with me trying to hide the fact that I think there might be mold. My issue is different. We'll talk about that because there's a mold form. And when we get to mold, we'll talk about that. So that might be an inspection that I would advise my seller to say no. Hey, Mike, what's going on, buddy?
Can the seller refuse to have anyone walk on the roof when it comes to inspection?
Well, they could, but again, it becomes it kind of becomes a little bit of a self-defeating problem. Again, if the buyer feels they need to do it and the seller excludes them from doing that, you need to make sure you deal with that in advance. So that's why it's always important to put these inspections in the contract. So in other words, if the buyer says, hey, I want to do a roof inspection and nothing's been executed yet, we don't have a fully executed contract. If the seller says, well, that's fine, but I don't want them walking on my roof, the buyer says, well, how are they going to do a roof inspection if they don't walk on the roof? Deal with those things in advance. Generally, what you end up doing, Mike, is you put language to the effect that the roofer has to be licensed, the roofer have to be insured, the roofer has to indemnify me against any damage, the roofer has to do all these sort of things. And then before whoever that roofing contractor is, they need to give you documentation that says exactly what I just said, that if they hurt themselves or if this happens or that happens, or if they crack a tile, they're going to fix it. But that is one of those type of inspections where if the seller did in effect preclude the buyer from going in and doing that, I could make an argument, well, you're not being reasonable. I mean, it's an older property. The roof obviously hasn't been touched in a while. It has to be done. So that would be one for practical purposes. I think you would be in trouble. Having said that, nothing wrong with asking for an indemnification. And there's language in here, by the way, there's language in the contracts that talk specifically about that. Okay, I think we covered paragraph 12. Yep, I think we did. So we're going to keep on rolling. Okay, so we continue with buyer's investigation. So these are basically the type that they can do. It just goes through and it kind of lists them, but it also says not limited. So they could, in theory, request something else. General home inspection, lead-based paint. I don't know anybody who's actually done a lead-based paint inspection in a very, very long time. The wood destroying pest and organism report, better known as the termite report. So the buyer has an opportunity, of course, to request that. Any other specific inspection for physical condition, that normally is going to be like what we just talked about. It's going to be a roof. I want to inspect the septic. I want to inspect the well. I want to inspect whatever. And I'm not going to go in a lot of details on these because we're going to go over the septic inspection form and the well inspection form. And we're going to go through these in detail. All of these are reports as we go through Contract College. But these are the reports that the buyer has the ability to inspect. However, without seller's prior written consent, buyer shall neither make nor cause to be made invasive or destructive destructive buyer investigation. So again, I've got to get the seller's consent before I do anything invasive. Okay. So I'm not going into stucco. I'm not, removing a ceiling tile to see what's going on or whatever it happens to be. You got to get the seller's permission to do that. I think that's probably pretty clear. Seller to make the property available. Okay, so again, if you've agreed to inspections, then the seller also at that time also has to make the property available for inspections. And occasionally you get weird sellers, it's a divorce or something's going on. And it's like, why will this seller not let me in this property? Matter of fact, we had this happen with Nikki. She's not in the office anymore, but man, she had a transaction and she represented the buyer. The seller wouldn't let him do the final walkthrough. And we're going and going and going. And we went back and forth and back and forth. I'm like, don't close escrow. Don't close escrow. Don't close escrow. This went on for a week. I don't know who decided to close escrow, but they had closed escrow. And there was a reason that the seller didn't want us in the property. He was in a divorce with his wife. There was claims on title, and the house was a disaster. And he didn't want to leave, and it was a mess. So whenever you have a seller who's not making the property available, red flag, big red flag. So keep an eye on that. They've got to do that. That also includes such things as keeping utilities on and keeping water in the swimming pool and all the rest of that sort of stuff. Here's our portion, Mike, that we were just talking about with buyer indemnity and seller protection upon entry. So again, the buyer and their contractor have to, indemnify, if you don't pay the contractor, they lien my property. No. You're not leaning my property. Hey, you damaged my property coming out of the inspection. No. You're holding me harmless. Your contractor fell off the roof and now they want to sue my homeowner's insurance. No way. We have some contractual language in here. Having said that, and again, you're right, this is one of those practical problems as well. The buyer wants to send somebody over there who doesn't have a license and doesn't have insurance and all the rest of that. Now they send somebody over there who doesn't have that. And then they hurt themselves. Now what? Well, the person's not licensed. And that's why you just generally, guys, you don't want to deal with people who don't have licenses, don't have insurance. Bad things can happen. What if you had a tenant that you're in the property and I'm the landlord and the inspector comes in and he does something and whatever he does now hurts my tenant, physically hurts them, leaves a ladder in the wrong place. They trip over it, they break their leg. Next thing you know, you're in a lawsuit. Drew and I had one, not really on a transaction, but the city of Moreno Valley came out and asked us to put in bark. Drew just reminded me of this a week or two ago. We had to do some landscaping on a property. So we barked it. That's what we kind of decided on. The city accepted it. We took a couple of bags of bark. We put them on the side of the property. Tenant, we think, knew they were there. Anyway, bottom line, tenant trips over them, twists her knee, and we spend a whole bunch of time litigating trip and fall. Because as the contractor, which we were at that time, it was our responsibility to make sure we didn't create an unsafe condition for, in this case, the tenant. So this is your indemnity clause, very, very clear. Title investing. Okay, so this is where two things we're talking about here is every property is going to close escrow with clear title. Pretty rare. You're going to be transferring, and actually it's going to be exceedingly rare, as in zero, that you're going to be transferring a title with or a property with any sort of cloud on title that has a loan on it. Lenders just aren't going to allow that. So any sort of loan, doesn't matter, FHA, VA, conventional, titles needs to be cleared, escrow is not closed, and lender won't allow it. Now you can close an escrow with clouds on title if it's a cash deal, cash transaction, buyer doesn't care, it's fine, I'll deal with the city on that issue, it can be done. But in effect, what they're referring to here is the seller needs to provide, even though it's normally done through escrow, copy of the current preliminary title report. Okay. Also, that preliminary title report gets updated. Okay. So they'll do the one in the beginning. They're going to update that prior to close of escrow and finalize it. Buyer's going to have an opportunity to go through that, make sure everything's cool. And quite honestly, most buyers don't look at the prelim. Quite honestly, most agents don't look at the prelim. Ugh. horrible. The prelim ultimately gets looked at by the title officer, the escrow company, and the lender. And they all work together hand in glove, and the title officer will know, hey, this number 4 is going to be a problem. They'll call it out to escrow. Escrow will call it out to the agent and say, hey, what are we going to do about number 4 on the prelim? We got to get it fixed. So that's generally how you guys will find out about it. If that's how you're finding out about problems on your prelims, then I would suggest you probably need to start reading your prelims. I'd like to find those things out first. I like to be the one that says, oh, by the way, I'm aware that we have number 4 on the prelim. I'm already working on getting it taken care of. So anyway, we're going to get those things taken care of. Again, all the liens, the encumbrances, whatever it happens to be, and we're going to get that handled. So that's generally what they're speaking of when it comes to title. The vesting side of this document basically in effect says we're not attorneys, and the buyers will get is that on the next? Hold on a minute. Yeah, let me come back. I think I covered everything I wanted to here. Yep. Okay. So we've gone through the title section. As we continue here, buyer shall at close of escrow have the right to record a grant deed. Okay. So they're going to get a grant deed. Okay. The manner of taking title may have significant legal and tax consequences. It absolutely has significant legal and tax consequences. Most husbands and wives take title as husband and wife's joint tenants. That's the right of survivorship. One of them dies, you don't have to go to probate, you don't have to do anything legal. Husband dies, wife gets it, boom, automatic, done. Deal with it, affidavit of death of joint tenant later, but there's no legal mumbo jumbo. You hold title differently, tenants in common or whatever it happens to be. Now the husband dies. Well, there better be a will, there better be something that addresses that. Otherwise, you've got problems and you get other people claiming. So we generally know the basics. Some of you know a little bit more than the basics when it comes to holding title. But at the end of the day, we need to do the old standard, hey, you need to consult a legal or tax professional to make sure you're holding title properly. Most people kind of have that figured out. If they're more sophisticated and they've got a trust, which by the way, just because your client has a trust, a buyer or seller, does not mean they're more sophisticated. My experience, quite honestly, is they set it up, they don't know anything about it, and then they did it so long ago, whatever they did know, they forgot. So just be prepared to kind of guide them through the process, but at the same time, direct them to get professional help. Paragraph G talks about the buyer receiving the Alta Calta policy. There's 2 different pieces to a homeowner's insurance policy. There's the lender's policy that covers the lender, and then there's the homeowner's policy, which basically covers the buyer. In effect, they go hand in hand. The lender, honestly, they just want to make sure that they're protected. So if anything goes wrong on title, they get their money back on the loan. The buyer may have some different considerations. So we are always getting lender policy and homeowner policy on all of our transactions. Pretty straightforward. Okay, I don't see anybody unmuting. Time period. So this is paragraph 14. I can remember being a young agent and was basically told, it's funny because I think it's always been paragraph 14 with all of the changes that have gone through this contract. I think paragraph 14 has always been labeled paragraph 14. But anyway, but paragraph 14 is the important one. Lance, hey, take a look at that, study it, memorize it. Paragraph 14 basically has all of the timelines in it, the triggers. This is when you need to do things. This is when contingencies need to be removed. So if you're bumping up against an email or a text message or a phone call, and the other agent immediately says per paragraph 14, then the next thing out of their mouth is going to be somebody's not complying with a timeline. You're late. And then generally, what does that mean? Well, I'm going to give you notice to perform, or I'm going to give you a demand of close, or I'm going to give you a cancellation of contract, whatever it happens to be. So you'll see the seller delivery of the documents, and this goes back and refers to all of these paragraphs that we've already been talking about. Pretty straightforward. And then we come in here and we talk about buyer review of these documents. We've kind of already talked about this a little bit, but now we're kind of bringing them all together. So the buyer has whatever time is specified in paragraph 3 that we previously discussed, which is the default is 17 days, to go through and take a look at all this stuff. They get to review all these disclosures. They get to review all these reports. They get to take a peek at it. Okay. Well, then what? Well, the buyer may within that time frame request the seller make repairs. Okay, I've looked at something, I've done an inspection, I've seen a TDS, I've seen a SPQ. I want you to fix something. Okay. We'll go into more detail because we will review Form RR later on in the class. Matter of fact, I think it was Myra. I mean, Misty told me, no, it wasn't her on the last person I called. I think Myra, I just see Myra sitting here looking at me on the Zoom, or at least her picture, said something about, hey, I've got a contract and we have an RR, the seller hasn't responded. You know, what do I do? I said, well, first thing is seller has no obligation to agree to or respond to the buyer's request, which quite honestly, I think is total nonsense. It's like, I think the seller should be obligated and contractually required to respond, even if that response is no. Okay. So I will tell you, as a listing agent, if you get an RR, resist the temptation to basically do what the contract says. Just, if you don't want to do it, just say, no, we're not doing it. Send it back. All right. It's just so silly not to respond. It drives me crazy. But again, the seller does not have to respond. However, if the seller does not agree to respond, or in Myra's case, if the seller does not respond, the buyer is not contractually entitled to have the, first of all, you can't get the repair done, but may also cancel. So you didn't do it, you're not responding, I'm done. All right. So, but don't play games with the RR, deal with them quick. I'm going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'll give you a credit. I'm not going to give you a credit. Just move on. You spend so much time on these, it drives me crazy. And I feel we spend so much time on them and waiting for responses. It's one thing if you sit back and say, hold on, we got to check it out. We're going to have our contractor come over. We need a few days, or I might need a week to review this. That's different, as opposed to just ghosting the buyer's agent with no response. It's just ridiculous. Okay, buyer shall, sorry about that. Buyer shall, by the end of the time specified, again, whatever the period is, deliver to seller a removal of the applicable contingency. So this is where the CRs are going to come in. So hey, it's been 17 days. Everything looks good. I'm going to give you a CR. Contractually, paragraph B3. They got to do it. Okay. Or guess what? We've done it. We're not going to remove the contingencies. Therefore, what? Well, we're going to cancel. We're going to give you a CC, cancellation of contract. So pretty straightforward stuff. Follow these rules, follow these timelines, and frankly, your files tend to get a heck of a lot cleaner, heck of a lot better. There's a little under section in here, and this one can get a little heavy. You guys do need to go through and read this several times. I'm going through it, taking a little bit more time, but you need to go through this to make sure you understand it. However, if any report, disclosure, or information which the seller is responsible, other than those above, is not delivered in the time frame specified above, the buyer has 5 days after delivery of such time as specified. So again, we talked about that previously. I think we were talking about the prelim or something. So in this case, the seller missed the deadline. The seller had 7 days to deliver a TDS. Seller doesn't do that. Okay. Well, then the clock starts ticking at a different interval, and that different interval is basically outlined in paragraph 3. Okay, continuation of contingency, even after the end of a specified time of whatever that is, let's say 17 days, but before the seller cancels, okay, pursuant to paragraph 14C, we got to go down actually, buyer retains the right in writing to either remove or remain the contingencies, okay? So let's suppose we're not getting what we want. It doesn't automatically mean that sometimes sellers do this. I'm not going to give him this, I'm not going to give him that, and we're just going to let the contract fall apart. A lot of buyers are like, screw that. I don't care if you give me I don't even care if I get the report. I want the house. Okay. So, or again, buyer gives an RR, seller ignores it. And seller's thinking, well, I'm not going to ignore it. I want to cancel the deal anyway. Buyer might be like, well, we ain't canceling this deal. I'm withdrawing my RR. I'm buying it anyway. Just because you didn't respond, or just because you didn't give me the required documents, doesn't mean we can run the clock out. So the buyers still have rights basically to continue on in the transaction. and for the contingencies to remain in effect. Okay. And then again, there's the cancellation rights or lack thereof of cancellation rights as you continue. So take some time, guys. We could spend a half hour just going through these items on the paragraph. It can get a little tedious because it's constantly referring back to how many days and what happens if this and what happens if that. But generally speaking, if you have an inspection or a repair issue or a contingency removal issue, and you're not quite sure where you fall into the category, just go to paragraph 14, take some time. You're going to find your answer in here. It is pretty straightforward stuff. Same thing with the cancellation side. At what point can I cancel? I'm the listing agent. I'm confused. When can I cancel? Well, read paragraph 14C. It's going to give you when the seller can cancel. So seller has the right to cancel buyer contingencies if by the time specified in the agreement, buyer does not deliver to seller the removal or something. I need some sort of communication. Why am I not getting that? Seller's delivered a notice to buyer perform. Buyer still has not delivered something. Then the seller may cancel. You just can't go straight to cancellation. Okay. First of all, you got to give them the period of time it takes them to. So let's just say there's 17 days for the buyer to do something. And on day 10, you've got some communication that there's a problem. Okay. And well, geez, is the buyer going to be happy with this? Well, we're not removing contingencies just yet. We're not doing it. And seller's like, well, I don't want to waste any time. I don't want to waste any time. Screw this. I'm canceling. They've told me they're not happy with the whatever. Okay. Well, maybe not. The buyer might just be negotiating. The buyer might be playing the clock here a little bit, looking for something. So in order for the seller to cancel, they got to follow the process. They got to give them the amount of time. They got to give them the notice to perform. They got to make sure all of those are in place. And then if all the boxes have been checked, then the seller can go to a cancellation. Again, this looks a little different. The seller's right to cancel under the buyer contingencies as opposed to the seller's right to cancel under buyer contract obligations. So the contingencies one's 3.1 is exactly what it says. They haven't removed their loan contingency, or they haven't removed their appraisal contingency, or their inspection contingency. This other one is, well, they have some contractual obligations. Let's just take this example here. They have not put their EMD into the property. Okay. Or they haven't done a pre-qual, or they haven't returned disclosures, or whatever. There's contractual stuff. So again, as we go through, the seller can cancel in the event these things have not been done. But again, same sort of thing's going to apply. We're going to basically give them a notice. But first, here we are again, deliver a notice to buyer to perform. So most of you guys have been through this class maybe once, or you've certainly been in some sales meetings. I will say this again. I've said this many times before. You guys know I'm doing all of the Sky Slope stuff now. I'm about ready to hand it over to Drew and Paul and Drake, or at least not hand it over, but say, hey, let's do this as a team. I've now been doing it now for 6 months. I did that on purpose. I wanted to kind of get a feel for it. I got a feel for it. On balance, you guys do a great job. But I tell you know what I don't see? I don't see a lot of notice to buyers to perform or notice to sellers to perform. I hardly ever see those. Okay. Now, if escrow closes, or if everybody's canceling in agreement, okay, fine. Then no harm, no foul. But when we get those nasty ones where something's going sideways and somebody wants to cancel, and you haven't been on top of your game, you have not been preparing and delivering these NPBs or NSBs or SPs, I get my acronyms mixed up, notice to buyer to perform, notice to seller to perform, then things get weird. And I get at least one of those calls a month where, hey, I need to cancel. Great. Have you given them a notice to perform yet? No. Okay, well, guess what? You're not canceling. So follow the rules. You're going to be great. Okay, and then you've got seller's right to cancel under seller's contingency. So in this particular case, the seller now has a contingency. These are rarer, but that contingency might be, hey, I'm entering contract subject to the successful sale of the seller's house. That doesn't happen. Okay, so now I've done the best I can to sell my house. It's not happening. And under that particular situation, in theory, I can cancel. Okay, I don't see anybody else unmuted, so let's keep on rolling. Buyer's right to cancel. So again, you kind of got the same exact thing here. So you got the buyer's right to cancel. Let's go back one. Okay. So we had the seller's right to cancel because of buyer contingencies, buyer contract obligations, and seller contingencies. Kind of got the same categories. So the buyer's right to cancel because of the seller contingencies, the seller contract obligations, or the buyer. So they kind of flow. If you've never noticed that before, they flow very nicely. So again, there's a seller contingency that's not happening. The sellers, whatever they're doing. So now the seller cannot deliver their removal. Buyer has the right to cancel. So what could that be? The seller's not selling their house. They said they were going to get it in escrow within 2 weeks. They haven't done it. I'm going to give them a notice to seller to perform, either remove the contingency or I may cancel. That word may is important there because again, sometimes people play games with this. They don't have to, they could. So at any rate, seller doesn't get their house done, sold, the seller doesn't remove contingency. Now buyer has the right to cancel. Seller contract obligations. The seller has not delivered the documentation I need. I'm getting ready to close escrow. This happens rarely, but it happens. The seller says, nope, I'm not closing escrow. We need an extra 2 months or I'm not closing. What? Contract says, well, I'm canceling, but frankly, in that case, not only could the buyer, they could have other damages. But anyway, the seller didn't do something. Now the seller or the buyer has the right to cancel. Now we have the buyer contingencies, which is tons of them. Buyer's loan didn't come through, buyer's appraisal didn't come through, buyer's inspection didn't come through, buyer woke up and didn't realize that the sun rises in the east and the house faces east, and therefore I didn't realize the house faced east and I can't buy that house. So pretty much they can cancel for any reason. Okay, so we made it to the bottom of page 16. Let's see if we can get to 17. Again, so we've got our kind of our definition of the notice to the buyer or the notice to the seller to perform. So this is the trigger, guys. So use these when the buyer or the seller is not performing. Okay, there's kind of the key. Give it to the other party 2 days after delivery of the specified, give the party at least 2 days after delivery. So you can't give them a notice to perform at 8 o'clock in the morning and say you got until 5 o'clock tonight. Okay, so we've got this 2-day window to do that. And also don't give it to them. I think it's kind of nice. We've got the 2 days to perform, but we also got don't give it to them more than 2 days before the scheduled contingency that's to expire. So if they have 17 days to remove the contingency, you can't give them a notice to perform after 5 days. You know, you have to give it to them on day 15 or on day 16 or on day 17 or on day 18 or 19, but you can't give it to them more than 2 days before the actual time frame expires. Agents tend to want to do that. That was kind of that example I gave earlier. I'm in escrow. I know there's a problem, but I also know they have 10 more days before they have to remove contingency. But I know there's a problem now, Lance. I'm going to give them a notice to perform. Well, no, you can't. They still have 10 days. You got to wait 8 more days before you can give them that notice to perform. So use it. Again, guys, I see so much confusion with these notice to buyer or sellers to perform. It's so simple. Okay. Give it to them 2 days before they were supposed to remove the contingency or at any point. Okay. After the contingency is expired, which frankly is what happens with most of you guys. Day 17 is come and gone. It's now on day 18. It's day 20. You're now trying to, hey, what are we going to do? And well, give them a notice to perform. It's 3 days late. It doesn't matter. Give them a notice to perform. Then what? Wait 2 days. See what they do. And then you get to kind of make your decision. So don't overcomplicate these things, guys. Use them. Call the other agent. Say, hey, I'm Drew. I'm sending you a notice to perform. I don't want to, but I'm doing it. I got to keep my file straight. I still want to work with you. I still want to work this out. I'm not here to go to war with you, but I'm going to give you the contractually required documentation so that I'm protecting my client and performing my fiduciary duty. Okay, effect of removal of the contingency. So I'm going to kind of cover these together. The removal of the buyer contingencies, the removal of the seller's contingencies, they're generally the same thing. When we start to remove those, we're now removing our ability to cancel a transaction for those specific items. So when I start saying, hey, I'm removing my appraisal contingency, I remove my inspection contingencies, coming back for a second bite at the apple on that same inspection contingency is a problem. You already removed it unless there's new data. So they just need to make sure the buyer is prepared to remove those when they do. Same thing with seller. Generally speaking, the seller contingencies are pretty limited. I had to sell my house. So, but be careful if you run into that situation where it's contingent upon the seller selling. Because now once they remove those contingencies, they of course lose their rights. Demand to close. Again, be careful with this. It's my experience is a lot of you guys want to skip notice to perform, and you want to go straight to cancellation, or you want to go straight to demand to close. Again, very simple. It's pretty much the same rules that we just talked about on the notice to perform, the 2 and 2, except now we've got the 3 and 3. Okay, so we've gone through the process. We think there's a problem. Okay, and now we're going to basically give them a demand to close. So what do we got? Let's read through this a little bit. Before the buyer and seller may cancel. So we got to do this first. Okay, somebody, and this goes either way. This is a buyer demanding the seller to close, the seller demanding the buyer to close. So we're utilizing these interchangeably. Okay. The other party to close escrow pursuant to the buyer or seller must first deliver to the other party a demand to close of escrow. So you can't just cancel. I'm not canceling. Okay, I've got to give them demand to close escrow first. The DCE, demand to close escrow, shall be signed by the buyer or seller, whoever's producing it. So that's number 1. Number 2, give the other party at least 3 days after delivery to close. So if, let's suppose escrow was supposed to close today and we're not closing today, I'm going to give you a demand to close. I can't say close escrow tomorrow morning or I'm canceling. Can't do that. 3 days. So the other one was 2 days. This one's 3 days. Okay. The demand to close may not be delivered earlier than 3 days prior to close of escrow. So again, let's pretend today's Tuesday and we're supposed to close escrow on Friday, or today's Monday, we're supposed to close escrow on Friday, but I hear there's a problem. I hear it and it sounds to me like this buyer's not going to be able to perform. Well, you've still got 4 days before they actually contractually are obligated. Don't give them a demand to close today. 3 days before close of escrow. Now, if you've already exceeded the close of escrow date, then you're fine. So, which is generally what happens with most of you guys. You're already past escrow. You're starting to panic. Thought things were good. They're not good. Well, you can go straight to a demand to close if you're past the close of escrow date. Then the 3 days, of course, doesn't apply, but this 3 days still applies. You still got to give them that 3 days in order to move forward. And if the demand to close is incorrectly delivered or specifies a time frame less than the above, the demand to close shall be deemed invalid and void. Okay, so if you want to get cute and you want to break the rules per contract, you've invalidated it. Okay, so you don't, well, I'm not going to give them 3 days. Screw that. I'm going to give them 1 day. Well, it tells you right here that you just voided your demand to close. Okay, cancellation, effective cancellation on deposits. We're specifically referring to the buyer's earnest money deposit. I think the next paragraph is, looks like I'm a couple paragraphs away from liquidated damages. Okay, so let's do this. I got 3 minutes. Let's finish. Let's get into this. We can probably, let's see if we can do a couple more of these. I might be able to go a couple minutes after 1:30, but not much more. Okay, so demand to close, effects of cancellation. So in effect, what we're talking about, now we've done a demand to close, depending upon who's in breach, okay, will depend upon how that's going to impact the buyer's earnest money deposit. If the seller is in breach, then of course the buyer should get their deposit back, no questions asked. If both parties have just kind of come to an agreement that the property needs to be canceled and everyone's reasonable and yeah, fine, you can have your deposit back, fine, you cancel, buyer gets their deposit back. Generally, where this becomes a problem is in 2 areas. Number 1, where the buyer is definitely in breach And it's like, well, okay, well, if the buyer's in breach and they have a $10,000 earnest money deposit and the buyer understands they're in breach and they're willing to give the money back, easy peasy. That generally doesn't happen. Even when the buyer is in breach, no one wants to walk away from their 10 grand. They don't care that they signed it. They want to fight tooth and nail. Depending upon how the seller feels about it, maybe the seller wants to fight tooth and nail. That in effect is what this is referring to. So I'm going to go into much more detail on this topic when we get to the liquidated damages part of the agreement, which we're not going to have time for today. So when we do liquidated damages, we will come back and we'll talk a little bit more about the effects of cancellation, but the liquidated damages paragraph covers it. There is, however, this one little paragraph in here that says a party, and this is so stupid, but it's here. And what's stupid about it is this dollar amount, this $1,000 dollar amount. It needs to be like $10,000 or $20,000 because $1,000 doesn't scare anybody. But what this says is if you have a buyer or a seller, in this case, a party, if one of the parties is basically being unreasonable, and by not signing the cancellation, they could have $1,000 penalty held against them. So the problem is, and actually they don't use the word unreasonable, they use the word not acting in good faith. So if there's no good faith, the buyer says, screw you, I ain't doing it. Okay, well, not only could you lose your deposit, you could be, $1,000 in damages, or the seller says, screw them, I know that they should get it back, but they've really caused me heartburn, I ain't giving it to them. Well, that's bad faith. They could be subject to $1,000. The reason that this is ridiculous and stupid is because it's not a big enough amount to scare anybody. And most of you agents, I mean, I don't want to take a poll, it's too late in the program here. I bet most of you didn't even know that was there. Okay. Who wants to be honest and say, I didn't know that. I didn't know the buyer or the seller. Normally this refers to the seller. The sellers are being jerks. But I bet 50% of the agents out there don't even realize that there's $1,000 penalty if one of the parties acts in bad faith, but it's there. But again, meaningless because it's too small. Okay, I tell you what, we're going to stop here. I will